And welcome back to Waxing On. Today it's Monday, so that means jazz. And as you remember last week, we started looking at some of the albums that were being produced by Creed Taylor on Creed Taylor Records. We looked at Deodato. Today we're going to look at another performer that Creed Taylor had in his roster. That's Bob James on piano. And the first album Bob recorded for him was Bob James 1. Now, he recorded about 3 albums, I think, or maybe 4 with Creed Taylor before he branched out on his own. But this one follows along the same lines as what Deodato's album did. We have some classical music in there, some popular music, and a lot of great studio musicians. I'll give you some example of the classical. We got Valley of the Shadows, Night on Bald Mountain, and we've got a version of Pachelbel's Canon on here. And they've really turned it around. They've added steel guitar, harmonica, gave it a real country feel, and I know that sounds pretty corny, but surprisingly it really works. And it's probably one of my favorite songs. That and Night on Bald Mountain are 2 of my favorite songs on the album, but the Pachelbel Canon is really excellent. And it goes by the name of In a Garden here, but no doubt where the origins are. He's also done Feel Like Making Love, which he had played on with Roberta Flack. So he used the same band and recorded it on this album. So we have a few more popular, a lot of classical, and let's get down to those studio musicians. Let's see here, Bob James on keyboard, of course, Steve Gadd on drums. We have soprano sax, Grover Washington Jr., Hugh McCracken playing harmonica on In the Garden. Trumpet section, John Faddis, Thad Jones, Victor Paz, Alan Rubin, Lou Soloff, Marvin Stamm. It's the who's who of New York trumpet players. Surprising to see Thad Jones in here. I don't often see him in a studio setting. Usually he was leading his own groups. Trombone was Wayne Andre, Jack Gale. And then there's also violins, cellos, and although flute and recorder, Romeo Pengue, George Marge. The recording was done, again, over in New Jersey at Creed Taylor's studios, and a very good album. I also had subsequent albums, but they were on 8 tracks, so I really have lost track of the 8 tracks. I really can't give you too much information on them, but for a good introduction into Bob James, Creed Taylor does an excellent job. And I'd like to say all of the Creed Taylor albums that came out around those days were really well done. He really had a knack of putting talent out there in a way that was accessible for people of the times. Now, Bob James continued on, and I've got another album here, and this one is produced by James himself. And as you recall, if you remember our show on Maynard Ferguson, I'm not really a big fan of what Bob James did as producer on Maynard's album Primal Scream. So I really wasn't keen on Bob James being a producer, but here he's producing himself. So he knows what he's looking for, and he gets it. The album, Bob James, All Around the Town. Now, a little play on words here because these are taken from concerts that were performed all around New York City. Also the cover, I'll explain that one in a minute too, with Bob driving taxi. Now let's take a look at who he's got on the album with him. We got Tom Brown on trumpet, Joanne Brackeen, Mark Colby on saxophone, Steve Gadd back on drums again, Gary King, Earl Klug, let me see, Idris Muhammad, Jim Pugh on trombone, Tom Scott in on saxophone, and Ron Tooley, one of Maynard's trumpet players, also playing on here. Now, this album, we got a few Bob James tunes, we got some actual big band songs. I'm trying to go through. We've got Bizette, one of his songs on here. We got a couple of Bob James. One of the significant ones of Bob James that we have, and this was a song called Angela. And how it ties in with here is Bob James was musical composer for music for the show Taxi. Angela is actually the theme from Taxi, and that's really probably my favorite song on the album. You also have a very distinctive sound back then. I remember this was early 80s. With our big band, we had a Fender Rhodes electric piano. And to me, that is the sound of electric piano. It's hard to match that now because so many of the pre-programmed pianos don't really include that sound. But we had a Fender Rhodes, and I'll tell you, that thing was a beast. It took 2 people to carry it. It was huge, but boy, did it sound good. And that's what I hear in the sound of Angela, that first, the melody of theme from Taxi. We also did some Boz Scaggs, We're All Alone, Stomping at the Savoy. So some big band tunes. And these were recorded, let's take a look here, Carnegie Hall, the Town Hall, Bottom Line, and looks like we just lost power here for a second, guys. We're still going, but that was, we'll see whether the power comes back on. We got a thunderstorm brewing outside. No comment on Bob James there. It's certainly an excellent album. If you get a chance to check it out, give it a listen. That's Bob James All Around the Town and Bob James 1. Two very different albums and two very excellent albums from pianist Bob James. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time if the power comes back on. Everybody stay home, stay safe, and have a great week.